the thing we have to remember, and Sun can probably tell you more on experience if it's on the nail or not. There's a component of our physical fitness that happens a lot, and it's the distinction between stamina endurance on the consistency end, and then peak performance on the overload and aggression, like overload stage. So these two, they are related and they can benefit from each other. But when you start reaching a certain cap and you're trying to focus on one or the other, it does take away from each other. So when you're thinking about warm-up, would it increase a longer playtime at peak? Warm-ups, if say like the middle section, like if you, we're gonna go even more into warm-up tends to be a weird thing, but say your middle section, right, where you're comfortable and you practice, that'll increase your endurance, and your endurance could potentially increase the endurance of your peak time, but it is very diminished. So if you go even further down and go to warm-up and you're gonna do that, that will aid in the endurance above, but then to the peak. So the further you're away from your peak, the less impact the endurance or the stamina you gain from doing that repetition will impact the thing. So say if your level is like this and your peak is here, which Sun has been for a really long time, where he's been a consistency player and he's honed the consistency, his peak did benefit from his consistency, his stamina, and his endurance, but the range is very small. The moment he goes and do progressive overload to raise his peak performance, it will split the gap, right? And then what happens? Your peak performance will go down in endurance and stamina, and the consistency will go down. So it's you have to imagine it as a tug of war. It's relative to your bottom line and your top line. So all this makes sense when you think about your experience in it. The moment you overload to a new peak, that new peak becomes less sustainable because it's further from your bottom. So all your activities that deal with endurance and stamina can trickle up to peak performance. But to get higher peak performance, you must overload to raise the gap. The moment you focus on raising the gap, the endurance goes down, stamina, endurance, and maintaining that peak performance. So it's a tug of war, and the time you take to warm up and consistency will pull down the peak performance. So the middle section is after you warm up. So your warm-up is short. It might not even be necessary because you don't have a warm-up routine technically. But when your performance spikes, it means that your consistency thing, you don't play in your consistency. You legitimately go and try to reach your peak performance right away. What Sun and including myself do is, when you don't go for progressive overload, you're working on endurance and stamina, and you don't do that. You simply went from warm-up to spike, and then you hit a point of fatigue. After you hit peak, you eventually hit fatigue. You could step down and do consistency afterwards. That would be then called a cool down. So you spike and you cool down, and it would be where the middle section is. So if you don't have a natural cooldown period in which you can keep going sustainably, you can't naturally build endurance or stamina. So if you're wondering why your peak period is short, and then there's no it just feels like a dip and not a plateau in the middle section, it's because you're a sprinter. You're not a jogger. And a person is both a jogger and a sprinter at the same time. It just depends on the balance of how long you jog or how long you sprint. So as a sprinter jogger, I do both sprinting and jogging. I jog at a lower pace for my warm-up, 1 lap. Then the second lap, I pace into my endurance pace, and that's 2/3 of my jogging distance. And right at the end, I peak and sprint to the end. And then when I sprint to the end, at the end, I cool down by slowing down to the pace that I can maintain. And then eventually, I stop. So the fatigue is going to knock me down, but I always have a middle section, a consistency section. So if you're not a jogger, if you're a sole sprinter, jogging is not generally, mentally, physically won't be sustainable until you actually do it. So that's the balance between an endurance athlete and a peak athlete. So like a aggressive athlete. So sprinter and jogger are great analogies to do that. So if you want to get a middle section, you have to practice getting a middle section. So for example, do you want to constantly set 300 pp? Like for me, do I want to constantly set 200 pp plays, or do I want to get a 300 pp play? Those two are very different oriented skill sets, and they take from each other. They can sort of overall help each other, but if you focus on one, you can diminish another one if it's well trained. So like if you're a super great jogger, like super great, like you're a great streamer on Osu, you stream really well, but you gotta work on speed at some point, and you gotta work on jump at some point. Well, when you do that and you become you've already been a good streamer, it's gonna take some of it away from streaming. It's a balancing act. So when someone says like, oh man, I've been working on speed, I got faster, but now I just lost my stamina a little, you have to go back and work. Some days I can maintain pretty high for round 4, it depends on how often. For example, that's fine, however you measure it. But I can tell you that you have sprinting, peak performance is non-sustainable. It's game time. So if you're a peak athlete, if you're a peak person, you're gonna expect that. It's gonna be some days you're gonna be on the ground losing the game. Some days you're gonna be in cloud 9. The difference is a peak athlete is not consistent, generally speaking. Unless you're a freak of nature and like lucky, hit the genetics things, and you hear all about those people, like the greatest sprinters of all time, their peak performance seems like it never goes away. Like it just keeps going. But the thing that you're describing is literally the symptom or the trade-off of not being a stamina endurance person. Sun might have off days, but his days have a narrow range because he is predominantly still an endurance person. Like 99.9%, that's endurance. He's not going for the Hail Mary play on like the 260 BPM way out of his skill level, but just hoping for that great day where he just peaks and just shoots for the star every time, and then keep getting feedbacks on 99% of this isn't my day. Because today, what I'm doing here is evidence of that. I have an off day, it's just an off day. Yesterday, it was terrible. Like, I was just crazy. But day 4, 5, and 7, I was going off. Like, it's like, oh, it felt great and whatnot. But peak performance is inconsistent. You're at the edge. So if anything falls apart, lack of sleep, mental health, you drank too much or you sat too long, that's peak performance. It's conditional. Peak performance is absolutely conditional. It's peak. It's the top. But I'm a consistency player. Like, I consistently want to be in a slightly uncomfortable position for an Osu thing. So most of the time when someone says, am I farming? Well, I'm farming every other time except now, so to speak. I'm farming skill when I'm not submitting plays. Submitting plays, like big top plays, you need to be at peak performance. And you're expecting to be inconsistent. So what I'm doing, the structure that I have, 3 times, if the AC is not high enough, done. Because I know, to me, fundamentally and realistically, that's what it takes to be peak performance. If you're not in peak, stop trying. Because what you're going to do is you're going to diminish your peak performance. So when you have an off day, it's going to demotivate you, it's going to carry over, it's going to pile up, and your peak performance is going to dip. So I made a deadline. If you're not feeling peak today, get your volumes in, move on. Next day, hope everything lines up, take care of yourself, and go for a peak performance. When you practice, right? When you practice jogging and sprinting, you do everything possible during game day. You do everything possible to ensure that you're in peak condition in order to perform just that day. And that's the mentality I'm applying to getting the top play. I have to ensure that my mind's in the right place and I'm not expending my extra endurance and stamina and mental endurance on not being in peak condition to do this, because I really need to be on the ball to get a top play. I'm way outside at the edge. So if you're always going for top things, you're a weightlifter, you're a power lifter. So if you're reaching your peak 80 or 90% of your session, like your sessions, that is not peak. That's not your peak performance though. Like, the identifying characteristic of a peak performance is that it doesn't happen very often. To have a mental mindset that think that you can be the best you've ever been every single time is the illogical interpretation of what is being best. Your best you happens very rarely. Like, when the stars align, you are at your best. If you think you are that 80 to 90% of the time of your session, you have not performed the task where everything mattered that one time. Until you do that, it'll give you, in my opinion, it'll give you a better appreciation with what your peak is. So yeah, you're actually right and wrong, or you're not right and wrong. Those aren't the words. You're accurately interpreting with the words you're using. So what I mean is, what you say is fair. You are a consistent player. If 80 to 90% of the time you feel like you're at your peak in your session, the peak perspective is subjective to you. To me, peak means that golden era. How often does that happen? How often do I go on a rampage of top plays? I don't. That's peak performance. It's literally the best I could be. So your definition of peak might be different from mine, but I would not call that peak. If it's 80 to 90% of the time you're performing at that, it's your wheelhouse. You're not overloading. You're not. So if you're wondering if you're like hard stuck or like you're you're not gaining incredible grounds, it's because the interpretation is you're not overloading yourself. So when a lot of people say, oh, I'm stuck, I've been trying everything and I don't know how to get better, leads to that. It has something to do with accurately determining if you're pushing yourself over your hump or not. So if you feel like you're operating at peak the majority of the time, then that's as good as you're going to get majority of the time. The other 10% is probably your true peak time. So in that 10%, you want to harness that to overtrain so that you can progressively overload. So you have to go beyond that for like 10% of the time. Whatever you're doing now, if you want to truly push your body to adapt to a higher level, it's not that 80 to 90% of the time. It's 10% of the time when you go even beyond 80 to 90% of the time. That's how I'm talking about endurance and stamina. Here, I am doing just that. I cannot maintain this. There's no way I can maintain this for more than 2 hours. If you have not reached a state in which you're playing and you can't maintain it for like 30 minutes or an hour, like a disproportionately small amount of time, you are not pushing at your peak. You're not going over your peak. That's progressive overload. There's a point in your training that you'll break. You'll like be really close to failure. That's the point of peak. So when you're training your when you're weight training, it's the very last rep at the absolute maximum you can ever do at one rep. And then you could say like, oh well, maybe 4 reps instead of 10. So like if you're saying, oh yeah, I'm doing my push-ups 10 reps every time, 90% of the time, it's like that's your non-peak, that's your consistency. And then you put 100 pounds onto your back and you do 1 push-up, you've overloaded. That is your peak. So if you haven't gotten to a point where you can't maintain something for like a fraction of the time, you haven't reached peak. You have not pushed yourself to your peak. I feel that way because I feel a slight improvement and usually get some point. Yeah, a slight improvement. That's great. You probably got an endurance boost. Endurance does trickle to some level of performance. But inherently, you literally say 80 to 90% of the time. Someone's peak performance is logically something that doesn't occur very often. Like what I mean is the word, the mindset, the definition. If you are at your peak 80 to 90% of the time, you probably have broken your hand already. You probably injured yourself. You're probably mentally exhausted. You're burned out. If you seriously believe, in my opinion, that you can be at 100% all the time perfectly, 80 to 90% of your sessions, I mean, if you're happy, we're not talking about if you're happy or not. Like, it sounds like you're happy with it. You're satisfied with getting that improvement and stuff. But to me, that's not what I'm referring to. So I'm clarifying that what you claim to be your peak performance, 80 to 90% of the time, it's literally the definition of your consistency middle ground. So rarely have you ever pushed yourself really hard. That's what I'm saying. So here, this is really uncomfortable. It's really strenuous for me to do this. But do I feel like I'm at peak? I mean, that's subjective, right? Like, you feel like you're peak, so that's reasonable. And you will get performance, you will get improvements by doing the activity. I'm not saying you won't. It's not the only way. But the difference is the efficiency of improving. Sun has done what you have done for years in Osu. But I can assure you how neurology and physical fitness come together is that if you spend a fraction of the time going way past your limit safely past your limit, that amount of time translates to 30 minutes a day as opposed to 6 hours for your slight improvements. So it's up to you to decide how much of that you want to take advantage of. Some people are relatively happy most of the time to take in slight improvements over time. But that is the difference between... So now you're less of a sprinter based on what you're describing. You're a jogger. You're a person who steadily jogs to improve. Like I get faster over time when jogging, but it will be nowhere compared to sprinting for like 10 minutes and then resting and then sprinting for 10 minutes. If I want to get faster, I have to push way past the limit. Eventually my jogging pace will pick up. I might be in peak jogging pace, but it's still incomprehensibly diminished compared to actually sprinting. So in this case, in Osu, if you want to get more reading speed, if you want to get more tapping speed, or something that is limited by that activity, improving endurance is not the way to efficiently improve. But if you're okay with the pace you're improving, stay happy. But the definition of peak and consistency, we don't agree on. You cannot be consistently at your peak. That's just, it's an oxymoron to me. You can be consistent at what you do proficiently. So I tend to consider myself an 80-20 kind of guy. So I always operate within my proficiency. So like the way I think, the way I do work, the way I write, I'm always operating in the 80%, where this is what I can do comfortably, consistently, and over time I'll improve. But I'll over time improve very slowly, like much slower. But for video games, for example, like playing different video games, I would do it differently. How is a way to learn something super rapidly? You throw yourself in no man's land and scramble, and scramble. Are you injuring yourself? Not. You might be hurt emotionally, like humbling and stuff, but at least the brain, what the brain does well is get incredible returns. So if you do something you're absolutely not familiar with, it's called beginner games, generally speaking. You recover so much of that because you're way over. If you haven't ever done anything and you do it for the first time, it's comparing it to zero. You're gonna gain so much from that, and that's kind of the method. It's the way neuroplasticity works in your brain too. When you do something, you rest, you consolidate how far you were to where you were. I mean, how far you were compared to what you just did is that consolidation. You'll retain a lot more, like you'll spike a lot more, but it might not be for everyone. I like slow and steady improvement. Sun is the poster child for slow and steady improvement. As long as you're mentally satisfied. If you're the kind of person that says, I don't get it, I play so often and I think I push myself 80 to 90% of the time and I'm only getting small improvements and I'm angry because I feel like I should get more improvements, you're not at peak performance. You're not over exerting yourself. You're not progressive overload. The reality and the emotional thing is inconsistent with each other. Your body and your mind responds to progressive overload. If you believe you're pushing really hard, the facts are you aren't, because the results speak for themselves. So how to remediate this? You record yourself, measure yourself. So for me, I know these, I wouldn't play these maps 80 to 90% of the time. I could do so much better with 99% AC on anything lower than this 80% of the time, and I could play it non-stop for 10 hours. Is that more satisfying? Yes, it is. But the agreement is to push myself out of my limit. So in a way, the reason why I think this is fun, like one of my motivations, you know, I share that this is fun to encourage me and Sun to like do something, but inherently this is encouraging me to push way past my limit. So by the time I'm done with this, I'm gonna go back to my 80 and 90% peak performance, right? And all the other things are just gonna be easier. They're just gonna be slower, less strenuous, and I'm gonna have more time. So my stamina and endurance already picked up from having to force myself into peak. The only problem is I can't be peak every day, so I have to figure out a way to measure accurately and not use feeling. Feeling is so unreliable for peak performance. So if you feel like you have slight improvement and you feel like you're at peak, what is your evidence? Like for example, take the same map, you can take like 20 maps and you'll just play them. And play them 80 to 90% of the time and see how it varies. If the math tells you you are constantly overloading, you will eventually SS all of them or like get really close, wherever your glass ceiling is. Honestly, I wouldn't consider these maps you play as a big push. I usually look for maps I barely get a B on. You're comparing me with you. That's not accurate. So you have no idea where mine is and where yours is. And also you never record, you don't record anything. So you have no idea what a B means. Like what I mean is, and this is going to be very aggressive, a B is not what I'm recording. A B could be anything. A B could be 60 misses and 0 100s. A B could be like 100 100s and 1 miss. So if you think this is not a big push for me because I don't get B's, I can at least characterize how I'm pushing myself. You cannot. And if I'm wrong, you can tell me. You can challenge me, but I can guarantee you I know more statistically about what is a push for myself than you do. So those are pretty close to... What was my objective here, Worm? Do you know what my objective is? Again, I'm not practicing. So the thing you're confusing is you are projecting your opinions, your relatively inexperienced and unrecorded self to what I'm doing. The objective is I am at the edge of getting an FC on these things. What is your objective? Well, you arbitrarily decided, oh, but it's for pushing for skill development. It's like, did I say my goal was for skill development? I didn't. So before you project your objective, please listen carefully. Like, I'm just gonna say this again. The goal is to FC outside of my range. So I have set characteristically where my peak FC conditions are. Not to practice to push for skill development, which is what I explained to someone else who asked, like, wouldn't it be easier if you just practice something else? And I'm like, I'm not practicing. If I was practicing, I would be struggling with something and getting a B. That sounds familiar, I imagine. So I can characterize when I am skill developing and going for a play. Now the question you're thinking is, oh, well, these are pretty close to FCs, but you're not pushing yourself. So how can you tell that the lower stuff is going to be easy? Because it will be, because I have accustomed and normalized to a level that's above where I am. I'm not talking about playing other 6-star maps. I'm talking about lowering yourself to another consistency. Like, if you think 80 to 90% is your thing, I'm going to that 80 to 90%, and those are going to be more consistent. This is 10% of the time. I mean, I could draw a graph for you or something. I don't know what else I can convey to you, but you are using your own standards to compare to my standards, which that's fine if you don't consider this as a big push, because somehow subconsciously being close to an FC means you don't push very hard. You have to push very safely too. You have to be safe with your thing. Am I gonna be able to get my goal of fulfilling this agreement if I'm just gonna right now say I should push myself and get Bs? No. So you still need your objective. What's your goal? So you basically told me to do something that doesn't help me get towards my goal, and then arbitrarily think it's not pushing. Well, I know it's pushing because I know where my training, and I record my trainings and stuff, and I know what my limits are. So I'm setting my FC at my limit. If I go beyond my limit, I'm not going to get an FC, because my goal is to get an FC on something way beyond my limit, which is 300 plus PP. There's no record of me ever performing this good yet. So that is my peak. Just because it's close to an FC, being close to an FC doesn't tell you if it's 600 PP, 400 PP, 500 PP. For Sun, being close to an FC could mean 890 PP or 900, his first 900. My close to peak performance FC is 300. So being close to something arbitrarily is gonna potentially mislead you to understanding what other people are communicating. Getting a B is relative too. What's a B to you and what's a B to me? So you have to identify that, and hopefully that works for you. I don't know. I'm not here to tell you what you should or should not change. You're not looking for help. You're providing your opinions on a glance at what I do. So that's fair. Like, I would get that. No, I don't. You shouldn't have to feel bad about it or anything. I'm not trying to make you feel bad about it. I'm trying to say, I'm trying to point out, if it works for you, absolutely go for it. Like, it sounds like you're happy with your, like, the way you improve and stuff, right? But I do have to say that when you measure something, I would encourage asking if that measurement can be consistent between people. So for example, I could tell you now that, like, if I were to assert that you're not pushing yourself because you're getting something or you're doing something, then that's not my intent. There's no way I would know that. What I was trying to say about the 80 to 90% thing and the peak thing is the idea of peak. So, say in your life you spend 80 to 90% thinking you're doing the best you've ever done all the time. how does that affect your rate of improvement as a person, right? Knowing that the scientific observation is that when you are beyond your proficiency, your gains can be more efficient, okay? Just knowing that that is the observed thing. It may not stay true, it may stay true, I don't know. But for now, the common acceptance is that you will see rapid improvement to a new peak when you're progressively overloading or learning something that is distinctively struggling, like very new or novel. So if your mindset is that 80 to 90% of the time you are in that zone, you are in the zone that is efficient for improvement, can you prove to yourself or convince to yourself that the rate of improvement reflects that? For me, I would need that information, which involves you recording yourself and stuff in some way in order to truly know if that's true or not. For myself, I know this to be true. So after I'm done with this, if I get a top play, I will see reasonable performance increase due to playing and slightly out in my peak performance for a brief amount of times, because I need to be in order to get these FCs. Could I be training differently to improve faster? Absolutely. But do training using bees help me get to the goal? It does not. It will literally make me fail this agreement. I will do that another time though. I will go and train and practice for the sake of practicing. But you have to keep in mind what I just shared about the objective of mine. So how do I maximize doing this and still improving? Well, I could have chosen lower maps like an SS or like an S at 280 pp so I could go for an act play, like a 99.9% act play. And what do I get from that? Well, to me, I get less from that. So I'm at the edge, as in I'm looking for a 97. If I can get lucky, like super lucky, I could get a 98% act on these FCs. And Sun will tell you that is not good enough. Like that, you get 99% FCs. It's like, well, that's his standard, but it's closer to his proficiency. I'm not that proficient because I'm at the edge. So could I go down? Yeah, I could. I could go down and look for maps that I could 99.9% or like try to SS instead for the top play. But I'm not. I'm pushing myself further and trying to reach for the higher achievements. So I'm actually outside of my comfort zone. So depending on how hard you push is relative to what you record as your consistency. To get 99% for me is still a push, but now I'm doing even worse. I'm putting myself in a situation where I can't even feasibly get 99%. And I'm barely reading and aiming it. And that has very little to if it's close to an FC or not. These are literally close to an FC because I demand that that's one of the conditions. One of the conditions to be successful in this agreement is to be close to an FC. So it's literally the hardest I can push, but still be close to an FC. If I push any harder for a different objective, I'm not going to achieve this. I'm just trying to reflect a bit to look for anything that would look like peak, as in rare occasions I'm able to push my ceiling. I just don't see it. That's fair. You're like Sun, Worm. Like you view improvement and stuff like Sun. I don't necessarily think you have to. Do you want to actually? So that's the better question, right? Sun doesn't feel great when he does that. But do you feel great when you do that? If you don't, you can always improve the way you are doing it, as long as it makes you happy. However, the other way, those are other different methods. Like, let's say learning a language, right? Learning a different language. I would love to just dive into a language and force myself, like literally just force myself to use a language, but I can't. Like, it's not an effective, it makes me feel bad and it demotivates me. So what I do typically is, yeah, that's fine. That works. It works. Just, I want to encourage you to know that without deliberate planning and intent, you are giving up something. And one thing that you give up for deliberate plan and structure is fun. It will increase difficulty for sure, but it will definitely give up fun. So if you're a fun kind of guy, that's it. As long as you're happy. I'm doing this not because fun is a priority, and I'm doing this not because difficulty is a priority. It's a deliberate plan to meet my agreement while extracting the most improvement potential I can get, that I understand about myself. Fun is like 6th on the list. Is it rewarding? And do I love talking about it? Absolutely. But it has nothing to do with the improvement of the game. So like, I'm having fun now talking about it with you and talking about the little takes on this, but it doesn't help me on my goal. Like, as much as I'm talking and stuff, I'm having fun with a different task. So the goal of being able to explain deliberate planning to someone and like progressive overload and stuff in the context of Osu, that's a whole separate objective, because if my true goal is to honor the agreements and have Sun be happy with me and I get out of Osu prison, I wouldn't stream this at all. Like, there's no intent. Like, what is the serve purpose of this? Osu has replays. They store stuff. So if I was pragmatically only had one objective in mind and they're not related, I would just play Osu right now without sharing anything, without being distracted or like putting myself in a deliberate plan of distraction, right? So for me, when I get online to do this, I'm pushing myself even further. I'm juggling the anticipation that I'm going to enter a discussion, it's going to make me cold and all that, and that takes me further away from the peak of Osu right now. The remarkable thing Sun can do is he can still like perform at his 80-90% even when he like reads chat and like pauses and stuff, but I go on long pauses, gigantic pauses. Is that a push? It is a push, because the longer I talk and digress, the even harder I have to push the moment I get back into playing Osu. They're all connected. I'm deliberately planning all of this, and it makes it okay. Like, now I know the moment I start this is the last map I'm going to play today, right? The moment I start this, I'm well aware of where I am, how I'm going to perform on this first play, and it's not going to make me angry or sad. It's probably not going to generate too much fun because no unexpected results are going to come about it. And that's great. That's what deliberate planning does. Pros and cons. Deliberate planning means it meets your expectations a lot of times. That means it's neither going to be extra fun or extra sad. So if you're thinking about the way you approach things now, where you like to play what's difficult and fun, 4 hours of great day, tomorrow 1 hour of terrible day, Deliberate planning avoids that. But it also means you can't feel super, super awesome, but you won't also feel super, super sad. When you're deliberate planning, you're going to end up like me, where it's within like 5 to 10% of my expected thing. So I'm not going to tell you that today I'm going to type on my title, best play incoming, or what Sun does, top 500 waiting room. I know I have a very good idea when and where something's going to happen, because I deliberately plan for it. I don't aim beyond my plan or below my plan. Usually when you deliberate plan, it's one-sided. You're trying to prevent yourself from getting too low. So whenever you find yourself really sad or depressed and you need some consistency, that's usually when deliberate planning comes into play. But when you're a healthy person, go for fun, because there's a chance you're at the top, you can go up higher. But when you fail, you're still healthy, so that occasional fail won't keep you at the bottom. If you're someone who's suffering from depression, self-esteem, and stuff, you can raise your bottom line using deliberate planning. And one of the first things that most people would suggest to individuals who are struggling with happiness, like depression, and like getting happiness and getting out of depression, you ask them to deliberately plan things. Give them procedural objectives and stuff. And for me, that's a norm. I actually do deliberate planning for the most part, because I don't seek fun. If I'm seeking fun, I'll play a game that I have no idea how to play, and I'm seeking fun. Guess what that is? It's difficult and it's fun. What do? I play a game like Rhythm Sprout. But here, I have a goal. I need to get an FC. So deliberate planning creates consistency. I'm trying as much as I can to not gamble that one day I'm gonna get a top play, because I want to get a new top play within the next month. I don't want to sit here and show Sun that I don't care enough to get a top play. So I sit down, I plan this stuff, and I'm gonna get it done. That's like going to work, helping someone, have a deadlines, projects. It's a different way of getting your objective done. But I do agree, absolutely. Play games if it's difficult and fun, for sure, until it's not. Then you deliberate plan. So if you ever get to a state in Osu where, oh, you don't see the improvement anymore and like it's not fun anymore, deliberate planning can keep you playing Osu for indefinite, because it will always be somewhat like fun. Like it's a middle ground when you deliberately plan, and you get a minimum amount of fun to keep you doing things. So do I quit things? I don't, because I'm always consistently in the middle. I choose when I can step aside from things. I don't quit because I get angry or get depressed or it's no longer fun or it gets too difficult. I quit when I decide I want to. Those are the pros and cons. But yes, difficult and fun, I can relate to that. Just not for Osu. Like, I do that for other games. Like, just play a game that I'm horrible at. And you get a lot of gains, by the way. That's what you're doing. You're progressive overloading if you're seeking difficult situations and you're only concerned with fun and not your competence. You are overloading. You are doing things that is well beyond your current skill level. That's progressive overloading. So technically, you do understand where your peak performance is, or you're trying to peak out. Like if you've never run a marathon before, and at this very moment you decide you're going to sign up for a marathon and you try your hardest to complete that marathon, you're at peak performance. because that's the best you can do. Peak performance doesn't mean you're doing well relative to everyone else. Peak performance is how hard you're pushing yourself to your peak, to the point of breaking. So you could be the crappiest basketball player ever, and you decide to play a game and put it all on the line, you're at peak performance. It doesn't matter if you win or lose, you've tried your hardest. So it's not about where you are relative to someone else, it's about relative to yourself. So here, I know this is the hardest I can do for an FC. If it gets any harder, I will probably be demoralized and probably never get the FC. So I am pushing the hardest I can possibly push while still making FC attainable. So it's not that much, is it? Like, I don't even have a stream map in here. I can't even stream. So the moment I put in a stream map, I can no longer FC. So that's way beyond my peak. That's so over my peak. It's unattainable. If that makes sense. So I'm pushing really hard. It's just the goal is to get an FC. So yes, they are all close to FCs, but they're the hardest FCs I can get, which is what top scores are, right? Top scores are legitimately the hardest, highest thing you can get, but still FC. I could have chosen so many others that are much easier, like just much easier, and I could just farm and see if I can, or grind is the word now. I could grind the 99.9% or the SS, and I would do it for 10 hours straight. Do I really want to grind for an SS for 10 hours straight? Sun would probably say yes, but I wouldn't. I would try for 1 hour, 2 hours, completely obliterated mentally, to get the lucky 97 point. You want to see something? No, what I mean is close to a 99%, son. What I mean is, like, your standards are higher. You would bootstrap on a higher thing. Like, I'm satisfied with this. You want to see peak? This is how hard I'm pushing myself. Like, this is how hard I'm pushing myself. 94% no miss. FC. I'm pushing myself as hard as I can right now with my skill set, because I'm realistic with myself. I'm already at the edge of my FCableness. I can't improve this. I just can't. It just doesn't work yet. I need to practice the skill, so I can't do that right now. I'm in FC mode. So what do? I give up on this for now. Like, I shelve this. I will work on this later. Like, I will work on something else, right? There's no way, for whatever reason, I do not have the skills for this. It just doesn't. So I'm being realistic with myself. I've recorded, I've tried, it's not gonna happen. So these are the ones that are the closest. After sieving through all of these. Alright, and I know this is gonna be bad, but here we go. This is my most comfortable map of the 6, I think. If I had to, yeah, if I had to pick out of the 6, this is the most comfortable one that I have of the 6. So that's why I stopped and did the digression. Like, I didn't arbitrarily decide that this was the time I pause and talk about a digression about progressive overload and stuff. I stopped here because this map is legitimately the most comfortable of the 6, so I can afford to do so. It's still not gonna be an FC, but maybe. I don't know. I don't like saying maybes, like, oh, it could be an FC. It's like, it's unlikely to be an FC. That's the realistic situation right now.